3 fleets died here. He filed paperwork. Right now he is threading a survey pod through their bones, 3 assaults worth of hulls turning around the rock in a slow halo, close enough that a frozen boot print of hatch plate taps his hull as it passes. 2 years of wreckage. Nobody has cleaned it up. Nobody goes in. Below him, 9 kilometers of nickel iron. A mountain with gun batteries sunk in armored pits, shield domes overlapping like scales, 2,000 soldiers breathing recycled air under a full kilometer of solid metal. A decade of digging in. It sits on the only navigable route through the shoals, and nothing, no freighter, no relief convoy, no fleet, moves without its permission. The last post-mortem said it in dry, careful language, cannot be reduced by any available force ratio. So they sent him. Not a Marine, not a pilot. A tunnel surveyor, 58 years old, 30 years of laser lines and dust in the belts, requisitioned to measure approach vectors for a 4th assault nobody believes in. His hands have never fired a weapon. They are shaking now for a different reason. The ground-penetrating scan comes back from the southern face, and it is wrong. Voids, deep in the rock, regular, spaced, straight-walled. Patterns nature never makes. He runs it again, same trace. He widens the sweep and the pattern keeps going. Down, inward, branching, a lattice under 2,000 enemy soldiers who do not know they are standing on a honeycomb. Then he stops breathing, because something in the shape of it is familiar. Not familiar like data. Familiar like a smell. He rotates the asteroid's profile on his display, tilts it, and a 40-year-old memory comes up out of the dark of his skull with his own headlamp still burning in it. Alone in the pod, he says the sentence that takes the fortress. I know this rock. I have walked inside this rock. They built their impregnable fortress on a mined-out human claim. And the only chart of those tunnels is 40 years out of date, assuming it still exists, assuming anyone believes him, assuming the enemy hasn't already sealed the one door he remembers. The claim records confirmed it in an afternoon. Asteroid KR441, registered to the Karst Mining Cooperative 60 years earlier, worked for 3 decades, sealed and abandoned when the seams played out, 15 years before the war. The enemy had surveyed a dead rock, found its surface solid and its location perfect, and built their anchor on it, never guessing that its heart was a labyrinth. Cray had done his apprenticeship in those tunnels. 2 years of his youth, mapping the deep workings of KR441, and the survey archive still held the masterwork of that apprenticeship. The full tunnel atlas, 400 kilometers of workings, shafts, and galleries in his own young handwriting. He took it to the fleet, expecting to hand over a file. Instead, he found himself standing at a strategy table, the only man in the room without a uniform, explaining to admirals why their fortress problem was actually a plumbing problem. The enemy holds the surface, he told them, tracing the atlas. 9 kilometers of rock, guns, and shields all pointing out. But the rock is hollow, gentlemen. The deep galleries run beneath their entire installation. Their reactor complex sits 400 meters above the old No. 6 extraction chamber. Their barracks vault was our crusher hall. They have built their castle on top of our basement, and they do not know the basement exists, because the seals and the survey markers are ours, and they never had the map. The operations chief asked the soldiers question. Could troops move through those workings? Some of them, Cray said. The galleries have had 40 years to shift. Some will be collapsed, some flooded with dust, some full of bad air. The atlas is a starting point, not a promise. You would need people who can feel a bad tunnel through their boots. You would need miners. And where, the operations chief asked, do we find miners willing to walk 400 kilometers under an enemy fortress? Cray looked at him with the mild surprise he later swore was genuine. Sir, the Karst Cooperative dug this rock. The redoubt has been strangling their grandchildren's colonies for 2 years. You will not need to find them. You will need to turn some away. They called the operation Deep Vein, and it began, like all mining, with the removal of everything dramatic. The stakes were stated once, at the first briefing, and then deliberately never again, because miners do not work well under speeches. The corridors occupied colonies held 4 million people. Supply convoys were dying in the shoals for want of the route the redoubt denied. The fleet could not take the rock from outside. If it could not be taken from inside, the war in the sector was a siege with no end, and sieges are paid for by civilians. 12 went in the first team. Cray, 6 veterans of the old cooperative, 3 fleet combat engineers who had passed the cooperative's brutal informal examination, which consisted of a week underground and the old miners simply watching them, and 2 medics. They were landed by stealth drop on the asteroid's southern face at the old number 9 adit, whose camouflaged seal Cray opened with the cooperative's standard key, a tool the enemy's decade of occupation had never found because it looked like a rock and sat 200 meters from anything. The survey phase took 6 weeks, and it was mining, which is to say it was slow, dark, unglamorous, and mortally serious. The Atlas was 40 years old. The rock had spent those years settling. The team moved through the deep galleries by handlight and memory, Cray's boyhood map against the rock's present truth, marking the sound passages, bridging the collapses, testing air pocket by pocket. The deep workings held. The old cooperative had built to outlast geology, and mostly it had. 400 meters overhead, the enemy garrison went about its business, and its sounds carried down through the rock, boots, machinery, the fortress's great heartbeat, while 12 people moved beneath it like thoughts it was not having. On day 38, Cray's team reached the survey's object, the junction his Atlas called Gallery 12, directly beneath the reactor complex, and found something the Atlas did not show. A tunnel. Rising. Cut by hand, crude and desperate and brilliant, climbing from the gallery roof toward the fortress above, and ending, unfinished, 40 meters short of daylight that no longer existed. Someone had tried to dig out of this rock, from the inside, long ago. And at the tunnel face, wrapped in 40-year-old canvas, the diggers had left their names. The canvas held a claim slate, mining standard, the kind every crew carries for marking finds, and the writing on it rearranged everything the war thought it knew about the rock. 11 names. Human names. A date from the last year of the previous war, the brief and half-forgotten frontier conflict of 40 years past. And beneath the names, in the terse hand of people rationing lamplight, the story. Prisoner work crew, taken from a captured freighter, held in the sealed mine by an enemy garrison during that older war, set to labor in the workings. They had dug their escape tunnel in secret, in stolen hours, rising toward the surface over months. The war ended before the tunnel did, the slate recorded. The garrison, withdrawing, had taken the prisoners with them for repatriation. The 11 had left their tunnel and their names, and one line more, the line that Cray spoke aloud to his team by handlight, 400 meters beneath the enemy, and that is now carved where the 2 tunnels meet. To whoever finds this, we ran out of war before we ran out of tunnel. Finish it for us. It wants 40 meters. The rock is kind here. Silence in Gallery 12, of a quality even miners rarely encounter. Then the eldest of the cooperative veterans, a woman of 60 whose grandfather's name was third on the slate, took off her helmet, held it to her chest for a moment, and put it back on. "Well," she said, "you heard the crew. 40 meters. The rock is kind." The plan rewrote itself around the gift. The 11's tunnel rose toward what had been the mine's upper works, and was now, by Cray's overlay of the enemy schematics, the floor of the fortress's lower commissary. Not the reactor, not the armory, the kitchens. The combat engineers thought it comic. The miners did not. Cray, plotting the final approach, explained it in the operation's most quoted line. "Every fortress points its guns at the doors it built," he said. "Nobody guards the floor of the kitchen. We are not attacking the redoubt, gentlemen. We are haunting it." The assault force came down the adit over 3 nights. 200 troops, moving single file through 400 kilometers of dark with miners' guides, the largest underground approach march ever attempted. And the last 40 meters were dug by hand. That was the miners' insistence over every engineering objection. Power cutters were fast and loud. The rock above Gallery 12 was, as promised, kind, soft seams and dry, and hand digging was slow and almost silent. And besides, the eldest veteran said, in the voice that ended the argument, that tunnel gets finished the way it was started, with bars and sweat. It is owed. They dug in shifts for 9 days, 40 years after the first pick swung, and Cray kept the survey exact. And on the 9th day, the tunnel of the 11 reached its last half-meter, directly beneath the commissary floor of the impregnable fortress of Cast Redoubt, and stopped and waited for the hour. The hour was chosen with a care that the enemy's own after-action review later called obscene. The fortress's watch rotated at dawn, garrison time. The night shift stood down hungry. The day shift rose hungry. At dawn, plus 20 minutes, the commissary held the largest single concentration of garrison personnel of the entire day, 400 soldiers, at breakfast, unarmored, holding trays. At dawn, plus 20, the floor of the commissary opened. The breach charges were the smallest the engineers had ever set, precisely enough to lift the deck plates, and before the dust settled, the assault force came up out of the ground into the middle of breakfast. 200 troops in breaching armor, rising from the floor of the one room where nobody carries a rifle, weapons up, voices level, in the enemy's own language, rehearsed for weeks, remain seated, hands on tables. The fortress is taken. It very nearly was. 400 soldiers at breakfast surrendered to the floor in 90 seconds. The assault force flowed outward through the service corridors the mine Atlas knew better than the garrison did, and took the reactor watch floor from below, and the armory from behind, and the command level's private stair, which the enemy schematics called Secure, and the old Crusher Hall ventilation called Tuesday. The guns of Cast Redoubt, the batteries that had broken 3 fleets, never fired. They were pointing at the sky, and the war had come up through the floor. The fortress commandant surrendered the redoubt at dawn plus 73 minutes, and the surrender contained the moment the whole operation had secretly aimed at, the moment Cray had planned for, with a thoroughness he never admitted to the fleet. The commandant, a decorated siege engineer who had personally strengthened the rock's defenses for a decade, demanded, as his right under the conventions, to know the method of his defeat. It was, he said stiffly, an engineering matter. He had certified the redoubt against every known assault. His honor required the failure mode. The stakes of the answer were real, and the fleet had argued about them. The tunnels were still a strategic secret. Intelligence wanted a cover story. Cray had refused, with the backing of the cooperative, whose contract with the fleet contained a clause no one had thought unusual at signing and no one could shift afterward. The clause said, "The truth of the rock belongs to the rock's own dead." So Anders Cray, tunnel surveyor, walked the enemy commandant down through his own conquered fortress, down the service ways, down through the breach in the commissary floor, down the 400 meters of hand-dug rising tunnel to the junction in Gallery 12 where the claim slate sat in its canvas, cleaned now and lit. He let the commandant translate the 11 names and the date and the last line for himself. The recordings preserve the silence which lasted 4 minutes. Siege engineers understand tunnels. The commandant understood, standing in it, everything at once, that his fortress had been hollow all along, that the hollowness had been dug by prisoners of his own people's earlier war, that his decade of armor had been built on top of an unfinished act of hope, and that the hope had waited 40 years and then finished the job. When he finally spoke, his words went into both fleets' histories. "We surveyed everything," he said. "Every approach, every bombardment angle, every assault vector. We never surveyed mercy. Who finished the tunnel?" "Their grandchildren," Cray said. "And mine. The rock is kind here. It was in the survey notes all along." The fall of the Cast Redoubt broke the corridor open, and the strategic consequences arrived at the speed histories call decisive. Convoys moved. The occupied colonies were resupplied within a month and relieved within a season. The enemy frontier, anchored for a decade on an impregnable rock, bent backward around its loss and never found another anchor as good. The garrison's 2,000 went into captivity with a statistic attached that both fleets found hard to file. Total casualties of the assault, both sides, all causes, 11 wounded, none severely, most in the commissary crush. The fortress that had killed 3 fleets' worth of attackers changed hands for less blood than a dockside brawl. The fleets drew their doctrinal lessons, wrote their papers, stood up their new tunnel warfare schools with cooperative instructors at scandalous consulting rates. That was the expected part. The unexpected part was what the operation did to the war's imagination. The story got out, as stories do, and it got out with the claim slate at its heart. The 11 names. Finish it for us. 2 species at war, and both their publics fastened onto the same image, the prisoner's tunnel waiting 40 years in the dark, and the grandchildren of both its diggers and its jailers meeting at the junction. Enemy veterans' associations began, awkwardly, through neutral channels, to ask after the 11. Were any still alive? 3 were. Ancient, astonished men and women who had spent 40 years not telling a war story because it had no ending, discovering at 90 that it had acquired one. The reunion at the Rock, a year after the armistice, was broadcast on both worlds. 3 of the original 11 carried down the adit with great ceremony by cooperative miners to touch the finished tunnel. Waiting for them at the junction, at his own government's request, was the old fortress commandant, holding the surveyor's lamp the enemy's engineering corps had commissioned for the occasion. What he said to them was simple, and is now the inscription at the junction, beneath the claim slate, in both languages. Your tunnel took the fortress. No one was killed. It was the gentlest victory of the whole war, and you dug it before most of the war's soldiers were born. On behalf of the garrison and the profession of engineering, the Rock is kind here. You made it so. Castres Redoubt was not demolished and was not kept as a fortress, and the argument about what it should become was won, inevitably, by the miners. It is a working school now, the Deep School, jointly run under the armistice institutions, where the mining guilds and combat engineers of 2 species train together in the 400 kilometers of galleries, the finest underground classroom in known space. Rescue technique, deep survey, tunnel rescue, the arts of the kind and unkind rock. Its graduates wear a badge showing a lamp above crossed survey staves, and they are, by charter, a dual-purpose corps, engineers in war, rescuers always, the charter's language drafted by Cray himself and containing the clause both species' newspapers quoted at the founding. Graduates of this school will be capable of taking any fortress. They will be trained, first and at greater length, in getting people out of the ground alive, because that is the senior art, and the other one is only its shadow. The old commissary, breach and all, is the school's dining hall. The breach is framed in brass, unrepaired, and first-year students eat their first breakfast around it while the story is told, and the telling ends with the tradition every graduate remembers, the whole intake, 2 species, descending the 11's tunnel single file to the junction, each laying a hand on the claim slate. Anders Cray taught survey at the Deep School for 18 years. He never held rank, never carried a weapon, and never quite accepted that he had conquered anything, maintaining to the end the surveyor's version of events, which the school preserves in his own recorded voice for each new class. I took nothing, the recording says. I measured. The cooperative dug, the 11 hoped, the Rock kept faith, and the fortress was never impregnable. It was only ever unmeasured. Write that over your bunks, children. Nothing is impregnable. Some things are merely waiting, very patiently, to be understood from below. The doctrine the Redoubt produced reached far beyond tunnels, and the staff colleges of both species still argue about which half of the lesson matters more. The narrow half is engineering, and it is taught with the operation's own numbers. 3 fleet assaults, 40,000 casualties, no result. 1 survey anomaly, 12 miners, and a 40-year-old map, the fortress in 73 minutes, 11 wounded. The force ratio at the decisive point, the lecturers note, was 200 against 2,000, and it was overwhelming because the decisive point was a kitchen floor and the 2,000 were holding trays. Strength, concludes the standard text, is a property of a direction. The redoubt was invincible upward and outward, and it was made of paper underneath, and every system, fortress, fleet, or institution has an underneath. The broad half has no numbers, and it is taught with the claim slate. The 11 prisoners dug for months toward a surface they never reached, for a war that ended without them, and by every rational accounting their tunnel was wasted work. It waited 40 years in the dark, useless. And then it was the exact 40 meters the future needed, in the exact place, with the survey notes honest and the rock kept dry because they had dug it properly despite having every excuse not to. The lesson, as the Deep School's founding text states it, is the one the war's whole generation took to heart. No honest work is wasted. It is only waiting. Dig well, mark true, and leave your names, because you cannot know which of your unfinished tunnels the future will complete, or what fortress of despair it will open from below. Enemy veterans' colleges teach the same passage, translated, with one annotation their culture added and the human additions have since adopted. And if you are the future, check the old maps. Someone, somewhere, has already dug most of your miracle. Your job is the last 40 meters. Anders Cray died at 88, at the Deep School. In his sleep, in the surveyor's quarters, he had refused to let anyone upgrade, and his funeral instructions were one line long, and the school obeyed them exactly. Bury me off the main gallery, in kind rock, and keep the survey current. He lies there now, in a chamber the students cut by hand in the old tradition, off Gallery 12, 40 meters from the junction of the two tunnels, in rock his own apprentice map had marked 70 years earlier, with the surveyor's symbol for sound and dry. The chamber holds his marker, his lamp, and the original of the tunnel atlas, 400 kilometers in a young man's handwriting, still, by school regulation, a living document. Every survey class updates it. The rock shifts, and the map keeps faith, and the requirement is written on the atlas stand in his own dry phrasing. The dead do not need the map to be beautiful. They need it to be true. The fortress above goes on softening into a school year by year. The gun pits hold telescopes now. The shield domes shelter greenhouses. The garrison barracks house students of two species who play a game in the deep galleries on rest days that the instructors officially discourage and unofficially invented. It is a treasure hunt run by the oldest rules there are. One team hides. One team surveys. The rock decides. And once a year, at dawn +20, garrison time, the whole school gathers in the dining hall around the brass-framed breach in the floor and shares breakfast, two species at long tables, and observes the minute of silence that ends, always, the same way. The eldest miner present raps the floor twice with the survey staff, the old cooperative signal, the one that carries through kind rock for a kilometer and means what it has always meant. We are below. All is well. Come down safe. The fortress never falls silent anymore. The rock is kind there. 11 names made it so, and a man who knew how to measure finished what they started. 40 meters. That was all. It is always only 40 meters, the miners say. Dig. If this story stayed with you, subscribe. A new one leaves Earth every day.